Hey, thanks for joining me. Hope you're doing well. The School of Theosophy teaches that a series of 7 root races or humanities will develop during the present round of the Earth's spiritual evolution. We are currently in the 5th. Each lives on its own continent, a word referring not only to the main continental area where the evolution of a root race takes place, but also to all the dry land that exists during the life period of a root race. Just as the root races overlap, so parts of the continents of one root race become incorporated into the continental system of the next. Creation unfolds as a series of epochs. For each epoch, there is a day and a night. During your life, you experience day and night. Similarly, from a higher point of view, your entire life is one day. Death is the entrance into night. After night passes, a new day arrives, a new existence, and the same is true of these worlds. Related to this humanity, there have been many days and nights. We are now in the middle of a great cosmic day. In Sanskrit, what's called a Mahamanvantara. We are in the 4th day, or epoch, and there are 7 cycles or rounds within each day. In the Akashic records, there have only been 4 epochs. This current epoch has had to do with moving away from etheric existence to physical existence. Helena Blavatsky writes, "We believe in the 7 continents, 4 of which have already lived their day. The 5th still exists, and 2 are to appear in the future." The first continent was the imperishable sacred land. Although little can be said of it, it capped over the whole North Pole like one unbroken crust. This was the home of the first race of mankind, the polar race, which had neither type nor color. These, our first ancestors, had ethereal, not physical bodies, and could not be injured or destroyed by death. We can absolutely draw a parallel to Plato's account of an original race that was deathless and non-breeding. In the Kabbalah of the Mayan Mysteries, Samael on Weor writes, "The Aztecs state that the human beings of the first root race were extraordinary, dark-colored giants. This was a very civilized, androgynous, asexual, semi-physical, semi-ethereal root race. The first root race lived on the sacred island situated in the North Polar Cap. That island still exists, yet it is in a jinn state within the 4th dimension. The second continent is very elusive. It's considered home of the second root race, the Greek Hyperborean race. Theosophical accounts say it extended southward and westward from the North Pole, but most others have identified the North Pole as Hyperborea's location, including René Guénon, Miguel Serrano, William Warren, and many others. Not to mention, the name itself, Hyperborea, refers to something beyond the aurora borealis, which shoots out of the center of our plane. So despite what Theosophy says, everything points to Hyperborea as being a polar continent. It's strange because in this way, it's very much related to the imperishable sacred land. And one must ask, is the second continent simply the first continent in a later time period? It's more than likely. After all, continents, as Blavatsky writes, has to do with all of the land in general inhabited during a root race's cycle. Let's go over to what Miguel Serrano has said in Na's Book of the Resurrection. He writes, "Hyperborea still exists, beyond the yellow sun and the black sun, in the ray of green light," suggesting that Hyperborea, once a continent existing at the North Pole, now has an etheric double within the realms of the green light, the aurora borealis. But this is pretty much what Samael on Weor wrote of the first continent. We'll resolve this later. The third continent is said to have stretched from the Indian Ocean to Australia, and this is known as Lemuria or Mu. This was when the gods walked the earth and mixed freely with mortals. All of these stories of Nephilim, Anunnaki, these originate in Lemuria, and this is also when the fall of man began. It was a slow process that kept up during the 4th continent. The survivors of the destruction of Lemuria gave birth to Atlantis. Hierarchies in society began, and worship of material goods started. The Atlanteans had degenerated a great deal and had now started using their awesome powers for evil. Their magical science became black, and with these changes came horrible devices. The Atlanteans could now create a mental monster that could crystallize into existence through their willpower. Millions of people perished, and all of the powerful cities of Atlantis submerged within the ocean that now bears its name. The fifth continent is said to be Asia, where theosophical writings tell us the fifth root race began. Of course, we're still in this race time period, so all dry land is the fifth continent. It's said that this Aryan root race, instead of evolving, has devolved, and its corruption is now worse than that of the Atlanteans in their epoch. And there are two more continents and races that have yet to exist within this great cosmic day. The account preserved in the book of Genesis can be interpreted to agree with Blavatsky's first four races. Genesis actually points to four different creation stories within one creation story. The first, the creation by the Elohim of a male and female spiritual Adam. The second creation story tells of a more materialized being made of the dust of the earth and placed in Eden, which in theosophy is recognized as the polar homeland. The third creation story tells of the separation into sexes, and the last, the definitive entry into physical bodies and the exclusion from Eden. In this way, this great cosmic day can not only be seen as four races and four continents, but it's describing the devolution from light bodies to dense physical bodies. René Guénon's account of Hyperborea resembles Blavatsky's in many ways. According to Guénon, this current Adamic cycle, which Guénon believed to be now nearing its close, began in the Hyperborean land called Tula, a similar name to the Greek capital city of Hyperborea called Thule. It was the first and supreme center, the archetypal sacred island, and its situation was literally polar at the origin. What manner of beings lived there, Guénon does not say, but he gives one to understand that our cycle of humanity began there, identifying, you guessed it, Mount Meru at the center of the earth, whom Blavatsky herself said of, Meru, the abode of the gods, was placed as before explained in the North Pole. Meru is the high abode of the gods. If we are to put together what so many authors and mystics have written, it's clear that the North Pole has significance as a flourishing paradise. Although right now we cannot resolve the odd tension between the polar and Hyperborean race, but we can gather enough of an idea. In Blavatsky's cosmogony, the first root race was created from pure spirit, and again, lived at the North Pole. This sacred land is stated never to have shared the fate of the other continents because it is the only one whose destiny is to last from the beginning to the end. While every race has and will be destroyed, this first race remains existing and flourishing today, housing the original divine consciousness. Accordingly, it is the cradle of the first man and the dwelling of the last divine mortal. Blavatsky writes, if the teaching is understood correctly, the first continent which came into existence capped over the whole North Pole like one unbroken crust, and remains so to this day, beyond that inland sea which seemed like an unreachable mirage to the few Arctic travelers who perceived it. Terms such as the blessed land of eternal light and summer, and the land of the eternal sun, are throughout theosophy literature, and this is referring to this continent and to the central sun, which neither sets nor rises in this imperishable land. Tibetan sacred texts speak of a mystical kingdom called Shambhala, where the most sacred of the Buddhist teachings are preserved. Both the Hindu and Buddhist traditions say it contains a magnificent central palace radiating a powerful, diamond-like light. Buddhist texts say that Shambhala can only be reached by a long and difficult journey across a wilderness of deserts and mountains, and warn that only those who are called and have the necessary spiritual preparation will be able to find it. Others will only find blinding storms, empty mountains, or even death. One text says that the kingdom of Shambhala is round, but it is usually depicted as an 8-petaled lotus. I've said this before, a symbol of the heart chakra. Indeed, an old Tibetan story states that the kingdom of Shambhala is in your own heart. The guidebooks to Shambhala, whose puzzling directions are a mixture of realism and fantasy, can be read on one level as instructions for taking an inner journey from the familiar world of the surface consciousness through the wilds of the subconscious to the hidden sanctuary of the superconscious. But even so, The idea that Shambhala is also located in the material world is firmly rooted in Tibetan tradition. Shambhala, our spiritual home, is said in Theosophy to comprise two localities on Earth. One of them is situated in the highlands of Asia, somewhere to the westward of the meridian line passing through Lhasa. Long ago, this locality was a sacred island in a vast Central Asian inland sea, known as the Abyss of Learning, or Sea of Knowledge, and was accessible via subterranean passages. But there is also another holy location, alluded to in all the great exoteric religions. This spot is near what the Hindu Puranas call Mount Meru, what the Arabians call Mount Quaff, and what the Greeks call Mount Olympus. It is the North Pole. As one approaches the North Pole from the snowy Arctic, the air actually becomes warmer and warmer, the snow cover thinner and thinner, until there are only grassy tundras, flowers, and a subtropical climate. This is the atmosphere of the center landmass enveloping Mount Meru. We originally emerged from this subterranean place many incarnations ago, and this idea isn't new. Many Native American peoples believe that their ancestors originated in a joyous subterranean realm. Specifically, the Cherokee Indians speak of a subterranean world much like our own, with mountains, trees, rivers, and people. The Aztecs hold that their ancestors came from a land called Aztlan, and that after escaping its destruction, they ended up in a cavern called Chico-Maztac, or the Seven Cavern Cities of Gold, where they lived before emerging to the surface world. Much like the different continents of Theosophy, the Hopis believe that there have been a succession of 4 worlds. Some chosen people were saved from the disasters that destroyed the first 2 worlds by taking refuge underground, and some survived the destruction of the 3rd world by being sealed inside hollow reeds. The Pima Indians speak of the emergence into our world being effected through a spiral hole that was bored up to the Earth's surface. And legends of origins in subterranean lands are also found in Africa and Australia. The Aboriginals believe their ancestors came up out of the ground, traveled about the country and created new tribes, then ultimately journeyed away beyond the confines of their territory or went down into the ground